Well, thanks for joining us for Teen Talk, where we've been talking about morality, how we know what right and wrong is, and specifically last week and this week, we're talking about relationships and how far is too far when we're interested in someone as a potential person to marry. And so stick with us as we're going to handle that conversation today. All right, well, we are in a very hot topic.
Yeah.
Something that teenagers always want to know is how far is too far?
Yep.
You know, like, can I hold her hand? Can I kiss her? Or him, you know,
Right.
if you're a girl. We always speak from a guy's perspective.
Yeah.
So sorry if we're not trying to leave you out.
Yeah.
And, you know, we do speak again back to identity when we were talking about that a few weeks back.
Right.
We do speak to the biblical model of, you know, men and women. That's how God designed it. And so if you missed that series, you can go back and look at identity. If you do struggle with gender identity and, you know, same-sex attraction, we'd love to help you out with that,
Yeah.
you know, and look at what the Bible says about freedom from that. But here we are, you know, how far is too far with a guy or a girl, you know, if you're interested in them. And so last week, we set the foundation of really what the purpose of relationships are.
Right.
Why God created sex, what it's for, that kind of stuff. You missed it?
Marriage.
Yeah.
You go back and watch them all.
No, it was good content.
It was very good content.
Just reading from the scriptures and what it says. You know?
That's right.
And we're in this transform series, being transformed by the renewing of our mind and not conform to the world. And so the world obviously says experience, get to know, test drive, try it out.
Yeah, you need to like get in and test drive before. How do you know this person's going to be good for you?
Yeah, and compatible, that you guys
yeah.
work together, that there's chemistry.
Yeah, you have to get some like people under your belt, things like that. You have to get like experience, and that's exactly what society tells us today.
Yeah, and biblically we don't see that at all.
No.
You know, we see that God created, and God created with a purpose, and God created two to become one flesh.
That's
and
right.
if you go out and you experience, you're creating one flesh with many people. And I showed you, you know, last week, like the duct tape sticky.
Yeah, he references it to like a prostitute.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, in Paul.
Yep.
In 1 Corinthians, yeah. But, you know, like, you're supposed to be sticky and stay stuck forever. But when you go around and you experience and...
Yeah, you've put some stickiness on that, you've put some lint on that, and then it's just all of a sudden...
Yeah,
it's just lost.
The bond is not
There's no
what
bond.
it should be. Yeah, and so you're wondering, okay, how far is too far? Well, last week we gave two principles to like set the foundation. One was the Bible says to have your own husband or wife.
Right.
And we talked about how that actually starts like immediately once you have interest in someone.
Yeah, like right at puberty, right?
Yeah.
You're supposed to act as though that person's there always.
Yeah, your husband or wife is out there, and you're going to save everything for them.
That's right.
And then the other aspect that we talked about was to not awaken love, to not do things that like cause us to lust, cause us to desire those things.
Yeah,
and
to spark it.
Yeah, and so we talked about 5 different areas, you know, mental, social, emotional, spiritual, and physical, all these different ways that we become one flesh. And so we come now down to the practical. Like, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, how far to the line can I get, or where is that line?
Right. Okay, so I meant to bring a candle, but I forgot to, so here we are. But often how we treat this line is like when I was a boy, you know, you have fire, and I don't know, fire is such an interesting thing.
Right.
You know, but you have like a candle, and you like light it, and then you're like, let me see if I can lick my fingers and and see if it's gonna hurt.
Yeah.
You know, and often that's how we treat things like this. Like,
Oh, yes.
is it gonna hurt? What's it feel like? Do I like it, or just curious?
Right.
And we come to our reading today, and we're in Timothy, and also in Romans, but you know, very short reading today too for you.
Yeah, you can.
Just a few verses.
We can all handle this one.
Yeah. Now Timothy is a young man. Paul is discipling him, writes him a letter. So this is a personal letter from Paul to Timothy, who is a young pastor, learning how to lead a church and things like that. But he's speaking to him, and in this whole thing, he teaches him what his relationship with different people in the church should be. And so he starts off and he talks about men, older men. He should appeal to them respectfully,
right.
Have honor for them, almost like they're a father to him.
Yeah.
Because he's young. Like Timothy at this time is, late 20s, early 30s, somewhere in there. He's very young, and so he's like, respect older men. And then he says, and talk to younger men as if they're your brothers.
Right.
So you kind of have this like father figure, brother figure. Then he says, treat older women as you would your mother. And then treat younger women, and he throws an interesting thing in there, with all purity as you would your sister. So he doesn't just say like, treat him as your father, treat him as your brother, treat him as your mother, treat him as your sister. When he gets a sister, he throws that phrase in there, with all purity.
Right.
And so the principle we see here is we are to treat other people as if they were a family member across the board.
Right.
But then with sisters, because he's a guy, because God's wired sexuality into him and the desire to be with other women, he says this with all purity.
Very intentional here.
Yes. He doesn't say that about older women.
No.
No, he only says it about younger women, women that Timothy might be interested in sexually.
Right.
And so that makes me think, okay, what does he mean by treat them as our sister? And if you're a girl out there, you can reverse this, and say, treat all younger men as if they were your brother.
Right.
And so I think about that. You have sisters. I have a sister.
Yeah.
Right? Have you ever been in the presence of a guy talking about your sister inappropriately, or sisters?
Yeah, I have two, a younger sister and an older sister. They're very pretty.
Yeah.
And I've had in high school, college, friends that would be like, "Oh, your sister's so pretty," and I remember I would be so irritated by it.
Right.
Man, that is my sister you're speaking about.
Right. And did that feeling ever stop you about thinking or talking about other girls?
No, unfortunately.
Right. So we're subject to it ourselves. Like, it's only because it's personal to us. Like, ooh, that's gross, or like, that's rude, that's disrespectful.
Yeah, that's my sister.
Yeah, yeah, and because you'd never think about your sister that way, because that's what he's relating this to.
Right.
Is the fact that we are to think about other girls as if they are our sister.
Yes, you don't fall into lust after them.
Right. And so if we're ever crossing that line of lust, then we have gone too far.
Right.
And so the first step is really to think about, okay, they're our sister.
I'm sure if you're watching this, you're like, whoa, I don't know if I'm liking where this is going right now.
Right. And I wouldn't.
I wouldn't want to hear this.
The teenage boy that I was,
Right.
No, because like I told you, I was curious of what kissing was like. So I found somebody that was interested in me so that I could kiss her.
Right.
And 2 weeks later we broke up.
Right.
Curiosity is a dangerous thing.
It is.
And that curiosity, I now have regrets from that relationship.
Right.
That it was a waste, And so I think about, okay, we talked last week about 5 different ways in which we become one flesh and we connect,
Right.
And so, like, how does this principle of treating them like our brother or sister relate to those points? So you have one, like the mental, that's really like thinking about our lives together and things like that, and planning and organizing, and even saying like, how does Allie Fitzgerald fit? Where are those lines? How far is too far in treating them like our sister, like mentally?
Right.
And honestly, like, if I say, okay, how would I plan around my sister's life? Like, I don't.
No.
I don't think about what our lives going to look like when we're in college.
Yeah.
Or when we're moving out. You know what I mean? Like, those are things I just don't do with my sister.
No, not at all.
Those are things that I would do with my wife, she were my wife, you know what I mean? But often what we do is we go too far. We cross that line, and we stop treating them like our sister, and we cross the line of purity.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Definitely.
And so what about, like, the social aspect? I think about the amount of time we spend together.
Well, that's typically a lot of like where it will start too. Like you start with like texting this person, or you're on the phone with them, things like that, and then you start to develop those.
Well, and then even sharing videos with them, or I remember when Christy and I were dating. At the time, you know, social media didn't exist at all.
Right.
Non-existent.
Right.
So we had free nights and weekends and that kind of stuff. But if you wanted to say something and it wasn't free nights and weekends, what you would do is call in the middle of the day and just leave a long voicemail. Do you remember those?
Oh, yeah, I do.
But then sometimes you'd save those voicemails.
Yeah.
You know, she'd say, "Oh, I love you." You know what I mean? Like, you know, these, I don't know, deep, sappy, emotional things, whatever. And you would save them, and then later on just go back and play and listen to them, you know?
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But again, like those things, the reason we save them is because they bond us together with that one flesh.
Right.
And we want that connection. And God has wired that connection in us. But again, we're going back to awakening love before it's time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you find yourself doing whatever you can in order to spark those. And to spark those like emotional plays that start like building that relationship. And what we talked about is you're awakening it way before it's time.
And doing that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Raising those crossing those emotional boundaries before it's time, end up causing us to not treat them like our brother or sister.
No, you move much beyond that, and then that's when you start getting these lustful desires that seep in, and then it gives birth to sin. Right,
and so like one thing I guess you could say is if you're having lustful desires after a guy or a girl.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're definitely, I can't say definitely, but you're most likely doing something here that's awakening love.
Right.
You're crossing some boundary, and you need to figure out where those boundaries are that you're crossing.
Right.
And then step backwards, get away from that boundary line.
Yeah.
Because you can't stand there and go, like, how close to the flame can I get without hurting myself?
Right. Well, it's like, you remember the first time you held a girl's hand.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was like, just the feeling that you got from that.
Yeah.
It was just, I remember what that like awakened.
Right.
In my like.
Well, that's where it starts. And
yeah.
So like I can remember wondering what that felt like till I knew what that felt like. Then I wanted to know what it was like to kiss a girl.
Right.
And like it's a natural progressive of like God designed it to be that way.
Yeah.
But when you're doing it with other people, you're becoming one flesh with all these other people.
Right.
And those memories don't go away.
No, you're stuck with them.
And we talked about that. Like, I can remember things with other girlfriends,
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I didn't, but I did it,
Yeah.
And if I had never done it and I was your age and I could go back and undo what I did,
right,
the older me would want to undo what I did,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think about, I didn't treat other girls as my sister.
No.
I saw a sign one day. We're driving into Florida, going home, and I saw a sign one day that like, when you go in Florida, there's a lot of like billboards for inappropriate places to go, and stuff. But there was one Christian billboard, and it had some girl that said, "This is somebody's daughter." And it was like referencing those places.
I've seen I've seen signs like that before.
And I was driving, Christy's asleep, and at the time, I was addicted to pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a kick in the teeth. Like, I never thought about it that way. This is somebody's daughter.
And it's the truth too.
Yeah, and now that I have two daughters myself, I totally understand that whole like pull out your shotgun when the guy comes over
Right.
mentality. Like, I got to protect my daughter.
Right,
know?
exactly.
And I've never thought about it that way. I never felt it that way. And the sister thing, like, I wasn't there.
No.
And that's why I come here. Like, that's why Paul's writing to Timothy. That's why we desire so much to teach you guys the same thing.
Yeah.
Is you want to know how far is too far. Honestly, you're asking the wrong question.
Yeah, you're totally asking the right question.
Because you're asking, how close can I get to the flame without burning myself?
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked, last few weeks of using our body as the temple, the Holy Spirit, and how we're not supposed to ask, can I, but really, should I be doing this?
Right.
Should I hold her hand? Should I kiss her? Should I make out with her? Should I send her some emotional poem, letter, long text, video? Should I do these things?
Right.
Because are they awakening love? Am I still treating her or him like my sister or my brother when I do these things? That's the question we should ask, not how far is too far.
Right.
But should I be doing these things? Are they keeping me righteous? And we're not drawing a line in the sand, but I think you can see the line in the sand at the same time.
Oh, you definitely can, yes.
And you might not like that line because well, in some respect, you shouldn't like the line because you're like Solomon when he writes in Song of Solomon that we read last week in Song of Solomon 8:1-4, where it's like, I wish I could be with you and put my arm around you and people couldn't say anything.
Right.
And then he says, but don't awaken it.
Yeah, because once you awaken it, it's a domino effect after that.
As it should be.
There's so many there's so many times that we were talking like this last night. I wish I could go back.
Yeah.
And like say to myself, self, or smack myself in the moment.
Right. So instead of saying self, we come to teenagers and we
Yeah.
say, teenagers, wake up.
Because I can't go back to myself and smack myself. So
Right. And that's what Solomon did in Song of Solomon.
Right.
He's like, I can't go back and tell my young self this thing, but I have this wisdom because God gave it to me. Stop it.
Right.
Treat them like your sister. Treat them like your brother. And so one of the ways, that's like, what are the practical things you could put on this and say, like, what can I do with this? We talked about last week with the pretend, not, like, live as if your husband or wife is out there.
Right.
And you're only going to do things with them and no one else.
Right.
So ask yourself in the situation, if there's somebody you're interested in sitting here, pretend your future husband or wife is not them and they're standing in the room watching you do this together.
Yeah, we talked about that.
This is a similar thing. Pretend they're your sister. Like the person sitting in that chair, the person at the movie theater, the person in the car next to you.
Right.
Pretend they're your sister. Would you reach across and grab your sister's hand?
No. No. Get away from me.
Right. Would you go over and would you snuggle her? Would you kiss her on the cheek? Would you make out with her?
No way, man.
And man, that's tough. That's legalistic. No, that's the Bible.
Right.
And you go, I don't like that. We're being transformed by the renewing of your mind, not conformed to the world.
Well, we have to know God knows our heart. He knows where we're going to lead to, what we're going to do with these. Like just by like touching somebody's, or starting with just the phone calls, and then it leads to touching somebody's hand, that kind of thing. He knows where we're going to go. So God's going to take that line and he's going to put it right at the beginning.
Right.
So he's going to draw the line to where he knows where it's going to start.
Right.
He doesn't want you to cross it. So he puts it. So yeah, this seems extreme. This is probably not what you want to hear, but
right.
He knows what's best for us.
Right.
He knows where we're gonna like start down this bad line.
Right.
So,
yeah, because we're, he says in Jeremiah that our heart is deceitfully evil, and so like James, here, we shared it with you a couple weeks ago, but this cycle of purity.
Yep.
And we're talking about this verse as purity.
Yep.
And then the cycle of sin. And so when we find ourselves, it says, we'll get to talking about this more in detail, but it says that in James we're dragged away by our own lusts.
Yep.
And when our lusts conceive, they bring forth death,
Yep.
which is that sin, and then we get in the cycle of sin, and I want out. I don't know what I've done to like get here. I don't know how to get out. The whole problem is that you are awakening love. You are doing things. You're treating them not like your brother and sister.
Yeah, so when you're in that cycle of purity, what you're ending up doing is when you awaken that love.
You mean sin?
Or, yeah, when you're in, well, when you strive to be in that cycle of purity.
Pure. Okay, yeah.
And what I'm saying is, then as you come around and you awaken love, you
Right.
end up out of that cycle and into the cycle of sin. It
Right.
manifests itself
Well,
into that. So
and even in our other reading today from Romans 12, verse 9, he says, hate what is wrong. Don't just pretend to love others. Really love them. Hate what is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We know that lusting is wrong.
right,
Is holding her hand wrong? No. There's nothing in the Bible that says don't hold her hand.
Right.
Does holding her hand lead to lust? Yes.
mm-hmm.
So what does he say?
Flee from it.
Flee from it. We'll get to it, but he says, if you lust after a woman, cut out gouge your eyeballs out and throw them on the ground, because it's better for you to go around the world eyeless for your entire life than to spend eternity in hell.
Right.
And so there are bold actions, and we'll get to them, but start here with this principle. If you have somebody you're interested in, ask yourself the simple question: would you do that with your sister? Would you do that with your brother? And if the answer is no, then you shouldn't do it.
Right.
Like, that's a simple principle. Treat them as your sister. And the whole point, it says, in all purity.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, is we're supposed to stay in that purity cycle, not in the sin cycle.
No, we don't want to be there.
And so if you're stuck in the sin cycle and wondering how to get out, we need to get to the place where we hate this stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Hate what is wrong, and pursue righteousness, which we're going to continue to talk about and how to get there,
Right.
and put practical steps on it as we get down. But we have another point tomorrow that we're going to talk about, another practical application about how far is too far. So I hope that you'll join us tomorrow at 3 as we continue this conversation.